Good evening, students. This evening you will be taking notes on the Confederation era in American history. If you would please take them in the Cornell Notes format, please write your notes in the right-hand column, where on the left-hand column you will finish your notes by recording main ideas, vocabulary, any connecting questions, any clarifications that you need, any inferences that you have drawn, any connections to other things that you have seen, and also cause and effect relationships. Please finish your notes by summarizing your notes at the bottom of your notes section. Thank you, and I will speak with you tomorrow. So, after the War for Independence, the Ohio River Valley was officially opened to all American colonists to settle. There was no more protection over Native American lands, and it was essentially open season for settlements in the West. Many settlers streamed into Kentucky. They were drawn to Kentucky because its climate was very similar to Virginia. Even though with no European help, the Native Americans still resisted. However, Americans quickly outnumbered them and violently eliminated their population from the territory. After the Revolution, each colony would become its own independent state, and each independent state would have its own independent government with their own constitution. All states sought to divide power between different branches of government, limiting the power of the executive branch and giving more power to the lawmaking branches that represented the people. Property ownership was a requirement for voting in every state, but as the country wore on, many states in the North began to outlaw slavery. In fact, Vermont, which would become the 14th state of the United States, would be the first state to outlaw slavery at its inception. Many states included a Bill of Rights for its citizens in order to protect the personal liberties of the citizens of that state away from government intrusion and infractions, to keep them as separate from Great Britain as possible. As was noted in the previous slide, each state was very independent. The thing that gave them this independence was the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was the governing document for the entire country that would become the United States of America. It was ratified by the Continental Congress during the Revolution, and what it did was sought to unify the colonies but limit the power of the central government. Each state was to remain its own sovereign entity, independent from the federal government. Each state would get one vote in the Confederation Congress, and there would be 13 representatives in all. Did not matter how large the state was, every state would be completely equal in the Congress. The federal government itself was left intentionally weak. They did not want too much power in the federal government, as in fearing a dictatorial relationship similar to what they had with England. And so the federal government had few powers. Most of the powers were left to the states, including taxes. And that meant the federal government had very little ways of paying back any debts that they owed over the Revolution. One of the few powers that the federal government had was to issue money, but if it could not raise taxes, then that money would eventually become worthless. Now, in order to unite all of the states, they had to agree on the Articles of Confederation, and this meant that all states had to give up their claims to western land in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys in order to cede it over to the federal government. This way, all states would be equal, and no state would be more wealthy than any other, besides what would happen just in their borders. In the years prior to the Revolution, Ohio had always been somewhat of a nuisance. Never quite knowing what to do with it, Americans wanted to live there. Native Americans fiercely kept them out. But now Ohio was truly in American territory. They had to decide what to do with it. So therefore, the Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance were put into practice in order to solve the issue of Ohio. The land ordinance had governor surveyors stake out 6-mile square plots. These plots would be called townships. Each township had to include at least one of those square miles for public schools, making it the first public school policy in the entire country's history. Now, the Northwest Ordinance created a path to self-government for these territories. When the territory's population grew to be 60,000 people, they could apply for statehood. It was also very important that the Northwest Ordinance outlawed slavery in north of the Ohio River. This angered many people, especially South Carolina and plantation owners. Eventually, the states of Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin would all be carved out of the Northwest Ordinance and become independent entities in the United States government. Now, the Articles of Confederation were created to essentially create a weak federal government, and they were just that, weak. They did not give the federal government power to essentially function. And so therefore, because of this weakness, well, things started to pop up that they did not necessarily see coming. And we're going to talk a lot more about that for homework tomorrow night, and specifically how the inability to collect taxes with the ability to print money led to something that's terrible for an economy called inflation. Okay, we will speak about that tomorrow. Now that you are finished taking notes, please summarize the notes at the bottom and fill in the left-hand column with your main ideas, what the notes are about, vocabulary, connecting questions, any questions that you have for me tomorrow. We will review the notes in class. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow.